Order. Welcome to this meeting of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. Anyone who's been to see Wicked at the cinema will know the frustration of ending on a cliffhanger and the excitement and the promise of part 2, and that is exactly what we have given viewers through our Select Committee's inquiry into British film and high-end TV, because we started before the general election. There was a slight interruption, but I'm delighted we're now back with a sequel, and we're starting by looking at one of the recurring themes, not just for film and high-end telly, but across the committee's work, actually, artificial intelligence. Yesterday, the Secretary of State tried to reassure us that the government is united on harnessing the potential of AI while equally supporting our fast-growing creative industries. And of course, it's really important not to overstate the distinction between these two sectors. The truth is, AI developers need creative content to train their models, and the creative industries can obviously use AI to innovate and to grow. So that's what we're exploring with our first panel today, all using generative AI technologies to make film and TV. So today we're hearing from Benjamin Field, the executive producer at Deep Fusion Films, from Nick Lynes, the co-CEO and co-founder of Flawless, and joining us online virtually, Martin Adams, the co-founder of Metaphysic. Before we begin, can I just remind members to declare interest at the point of asking their questions? And actually, as a starting point, could I ask you all just to very briefly introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about how your business is using AI? Benjamin, can I start with you, please?
So we set Deep Fusion up in order to sit at the intersection between technology, specifically AI, and traditional filmmaking techniques. And so that's what we did. We then used the policy information that I've been co-writing alongside industry bodies like PACT and Equity and Writers Guild of Great Britain in order to inform the choices that we made to make sure that the technology we were offering as part of our creative output was ethical, legal and responsible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Nick?
Yeah, and we're providing some of the products I imagine that be used from the AI side. We've developed 3 products that, again, responsible, using ethical data, etc. The first product that we do dialogue changing, so you can change the dialogue without having to go back to set. So obviously big cost reductions and more creative options. And we've also got another product which is killing dubbing and subtitling, which is allowing for an authentic translation where we match the lips to the foreign language. We've also got a product that protects artistic rights.
Very good, thank you very much. And Martin, please.
Hi, so yeah, Martin Adams from Metaphysic.ai. We specialize in the use of AI to power photorealistic content. So we're always working with consent and permission data sets, and we can essentially scan anything in the real world, and could be an item, could be an environment, a room, could be a voice or a face, and then sort of power that up into a digital feed, which is of course of a lot of value to busy actors who may not be able to be on set for every location shoot, or for a filmmaker who's sort of trying to push the boundaries of innovation of what you can do with a normal traditional camera or production setup. So we work across big movies, branded content, live events, etc. And yeah, just wanted to say thank you for having all of us here today, and hopefully closing in a bit of a knowledge gap about an area that's oft talk about, but very often misunderstood as well.
Thank you for joining us, Martin. You may be able to hear in the background you're competing with a tractor demonstration that's happening outside our window. So I'm going to have to ask you to speak up as loudly as you can. We're going to play with the sound here as well, but you are competing with the William Tell Overture as performed by a passing tractor. Not a phrase I ever thought I'd hear myself say. So welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to start the questions. Ben, can I start with you? What do you think are the biggest opportunities for artificial intelligence to stimulate growth in film and high-end TV?
Do you mean technology-wise, or do you mean sort of more broadly?
Well, more broadly.
So I went over to the US at the beginning of May in order to try and sell formats and show ideas over to US networks and studios. And what I discovered was that the US studios were very, very nervous to the point of not doing anything with AI. And when we put forward how we were working and that we were working with PACT and the industry bodies and that there was interest sort of from sort of a pan network, if you like, what we discovered was that the US industries suddenly went, oh, actually, if you make it in the UK, you can export it to us, and there's a step removed, so therefore it's okay. So actually, the idea of being able to legislate sort of effectively that makes what we do in the UK defined as legal means that there is a huge export opportunity for the UK creative sector at the moment. So that that is a very, very broad answer to something which I could be quite specific about.
That's very helpful.
But that is the answer.
Useful for setting the scene. Thank you very much, Martin. Your company worked on Here, the movie that was shot in the UK. How important do you think that AI will be to, sort of following from Ben's point, to maintaining the UK's competitive advantage as a destination for production?
I think it's absolutely crucial. So we know that we have sort of the production facilities and that they're well regarded and very impressive. We know also that the UK has done a decent job, I would say, at attracting technology talent and the innovation talent that can work on building innovative and valuable AI algorithms. And I think for a filmmaker like Robert Zemeckis and the cast, Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, etc., it was the combination of those two things that made Here a film that was possible to shoot in the first place, and the UK an exciting and kind of maybe the only real valid place that they could come and do it on the budget that they have. This was a Hollywood movie, but it wasn't at Hollywood, huge budgets. And so I think it's essential, that combination of innovation and the more traditional reputation that the UK has for sort of production and post-production.
So Nick, your part then, what do you think's needed? Where is the competition coming from, and what is needed for the industry to grow further, maintain that competitive advantage? What do you need the government to be doing, and more broadly the sector to be doing?
Yeah, I think the UK film rebate is a really successful initiative. I think that we're going to be looking at quite a serious augmentation of the filmmaking process as we go through the next few years. It's going to happen very quickly. I think we're going to be starting to see parallelization of process. It's been a linear process traditionally. We're going to start to see parallelization. I think we're going to start to see a lot of different tools coming in. The confusion between what is post-production and what's production is going to start. It's already a completely blurred line, to be honest with you. And I think that the opportunity is for us to be able to say, okay, we fully start to understand what that new filmmaking process is and be able to start to capture more elements of this new way of making film within that rebate. I think that's a great opportunity because that will draw more filmmakers to the UK. I think there's a lot of opportunities. I could keep talking, but I think that's just one good example.
And are the VFX tax reliefs that were recently announced, is that going to be enough to maximise the potential?
I think it's basically what you wrap within that tax relief, and I think because ultimately the wording was designed around a linear filmmaking process with a traditional understanding of filmmaking, and I think certainly from my side I'd be willing to work with you to help understand the direction that things are already sort of moved to that maybe aren't even anticipated, but what's going to happen in the next couple of years, where there's an almost certain sort of outcome of how filmmaking is going to be done in the next few years. I think wrapping that around the new processes, I think is just going to draw a massive amount of people here. I'll just give you one very simple example. There's an opportunity using that localization, the dubbing, and it's not dubbing and subtitling, it's visual dubbing, but it gives audiences the ability to be able to see a movie in their language in a really digestible way. But it means that you can now sell that movie in multiple languages for the price of the original language movie. Now, if you can get that wrapped into your UK rebate, for example, right, it means that you're going to be drawing a load more film production companies over here, to be able to take advantage of that. So you get the whole production just because you've bolted on a couple of extra things. And it sounds very self-serving that I'm just delivering that piece of information, but I believe there's an opportunity around maybe 10 or 15 other opportunities like that. But it's really just born down to making sure that you understand how films are going to be made in the future with the augmentation of some virtual done responsibly and some physical done in the same way that's traditionally done.
Yes, Ben.
Sorry, if I can add to that, I think that the tools that are made, and can be sold, I think is absolutely an opportunity. The roadblock to selling those tools currently is actually about the training data of those tools. So it's a clarification of where the training data that went into building those tools actually came from, and whether those are licensed or unlicensed. That is it. Sorry, that is the. So out of all the conversations I have with network studios, panels, wherever, filmmakers, production companies, the central conversation always comes back down to, but can I use it without screwing over our own industry by using software that is trained legally and licensed from the filmmakers who created the data in the first place. Yeah. That's the primary thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll very much endorse that. My co-founder is a director, writer, producer, director. From day one, I knew from the commercial side that you weren't going to be able to steal data and then try and sell it back to the same people, and then from an artistic rights protection, you can't steal people's performances or art or other forms of art and then sell it back to them. So, actually doing things responsibly is simple, but it is just it's not easy. It takes a lot more money, right? It takes a lot more time, but it's perfectly possible to do it. And all of our products sit on clean data. And the final product that we developed, by doing that, we realized there was a commercial opportunity in building products that actually show audit trails and consent flows to make sure that there's ability to be able to prove that there's clean data within your products. And we're getting, we've had great successes with speaking to the same people that you're talking about in the US and in the UK. Because if you can go in and you can say, these are all the huge benefits, you're bringing costs down, which is going to increase the amount of production overall, right? So, and then speaking to them and saying, but we can do it with this clean data, and here's the proof. And if we did something synthetic, we got consent for doing that. There was consent flows within these products, and then, like I say, audit trails to show where the data that came from for the training.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much.
I mean,
sorry, Martin, I do apologise. Yes.
No, absolutely. So yeah, I think what we're maybe all saying on some level is that good ethics is actually good business in this space. And I think it's very important when we're talking about AI and we're thinking about how we can both stimulate its use, but also sort of protect nefarious uses, to distinguish the business models and the applications that maybe are being covered in the news, the open AIs, etc., where it's very much an open platform, and the ability to sort of exert any sort of control over the usage that people might have is very, very difficult. It's not part of their business model. Whereas when we're talking about film and high-end television, we're much, much closer to that end use. We're much closer to the data sets. We're closer to the actors, the storytellers. And often there's a lot of human in the loop still in the process of these technologies. And that sort of helps to prevent against it being used, powerful technologies being used for pornography or for non-consensual uses, and often missed in the debate.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to James now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I should declare an interest. My wife is a jobbing actor and has done voiceover work as well, which you'll be pleased to have had an advert for here, I'm sure. Thank you very much. And it's really impressive to see you, it feels like wrestling with the very real issues of to your word, Nick, not screwing over the sector that you're working within. I don't know if you caught any of the conversation we had with the Secretary of State yesterday, but I just want to pick up on a point you made, Ben, around the export opportunity, helping navigate the laws that exist in the US by exporting work that you do here, helps them get round laws that they presumably can't navigate without importing work that we do here. Is that a fair take of the point you're making?
It's not necessarily circumventing laws. It's about circumventing, or working in a creative way in order to get around a problem. And the problem, of course, in the US is that the reaction to the SAG-AFTRA strikes and the writers' strikes and all the rest of it means that any time a studio suggests using AI, there is immediate backlash. Whereas actually, if it's made in the UK, the guidelines we have set up, through Pact and Equity and all, any number of the others that you care to mention, those are more aligned with how to make everything work. So, but again, you know, that primary problem of, okay, but are you using software that is ethically that is ethical and legal, that still comes back to being the main bugbear. So I mean, as it stands at the moment, we were able to convince one US network to enter into an AI development deal, which we believe is the first and only AI development TV deal inside the US, and that has been because of the work that's been done by industry bodies in the UK. And that's not about circumventing laws, it's about changing perceptions. Within
the conversation that we're having about AI, there is a sense that the US and Europe have been faster in getting their laws together. The Secretary of State's view was that it was too blunt an instrument in some instances in Europe. Is this not a case that we're slightly just behind the curve on this?
We are behind the curve.
And so is your hope that we would effectively keep the divergence between our laws and the US state of play, and that if we seek to protect the workforce that the US laws do, we would need to have different guidance when...
No, I think we can protect the workforce and protect copyright at the same time. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and we're not looking to take advantage of our workforce at all. The EU AI Act places the risk to the creative industries from AI as a low risk. And frankly, that's ridiculous, because actually, as the second largest export business in the UK, the threat to AI and AI workforces is actually huge, and it could decimate our industry. So actually, we need to legislate to ensure that the practices that we can employ are legal and ethical, and at the point that is our point of differentiation, so that we say, right, we have laws that set out exactly what is legal, so therefore we can export that and you can buy it from us knowing that it is legal and it is safe and it is responsible, and it enhances our workforce and doesn't trample over everybody's rights. And I think as soon as we unlock that, and that is what the industry is crying out for, to put this in perspective, I probably do 1 to 2 panels a week. And they are fairly significant panels. This afternoon I'm speaking in Marrakesh to the World Science Congress. I'm not going. I'm doing a Martin.
Oh, again, yeah.
Yeah.
You get a move on. If you
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Especially as I missed my opportunity to get the right train this morning. So anyway, we look at those as being the things that is our main point of differentiation. And actually, that is where the massive opportunity lies, because as soon as we can unlock and say, right, this is what we say is legal, therefore everything we export is safe, people can buy it from us. And there is a massive market waiting to do that.
That's great. Okay. Nick, you talked about unintended and wanting to work with us, and as we develop the conversation, it feels very much like you're sort of trying to be the honest broker here, but also slightly reporting from the front line as to the developments, both the good stuff that we should seize and the opportunity, which we'll come on to, around the growth and the losers and the winners. But what are the other unintended? You talked about the matching of, I think you were talking about the syncing of the actors' mouth movements with the sound of the language. Is that the matching of the visual, or is it the replacement also, hence why I declared an interest, of the narrator as well? Yeah,
number 3.
I knew what you were probably getting at when you declared your interest there. We use voice actors. The truth of actual synthetic audio right now for a full performance range, it's not there anyway. And the question should remain over whether it should ever be, the thing that's implemented. I think that, I don't think that we should be, I don't think it should come from government. I think there'll be legal precedent around copyright, just to sort of reference what was just previously said, there is a number of court cases going on at the moment all over the world, where, copyright decisions will be made, right? All content right now in the conversations that Ben's having with those, whether it's studios over in the US or in the UK, they're distributors, and those distributors are very, very cautious right now because there isn't any precedent that's actually saying what the situation is around copyright and as it relates to whether it's just called LLMs or just large data sets or any data set, to be honest with you, that's generating something, using AI. So I think that, once that starts to become understood in legal precedent, I think that gives us an opportunity to be able to navigate the world a little bit better. I think until we can get to that point, which I think is just a matter of course of time, I think unless you can prove that you've got clean data in your system, people aren't going to be willing to to use your systems, etc. So I think it's going to have to be a self-serve, ethical, clean data approach for a while.
On that issue of voice dubbing, can I just go over to Rupert? You had to pick.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was going to ask about the use of AI in voice dubbing. Is that the end of those, or?
How do you mean?
Yeah, is that my question now, or is this just a little PS on the back of someone else?
You've got some extra questions on voice dubbing, haven't you?
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to ask how you see post-production changing with AI voice dubbing. I mean, there was always dubbing of foreign language films, for example.
Yeah.
So is it just Yeah,
so what we do is we will take, so currently we'll use the same actors. They will do the same performances, and that audio will be driven through our system, which then changes essentially the lip sync so that the audiences will be able to enjoy the content in, looks like a native language experience. And that's currently how things are done. Of course, there is, from the fringes, there is a lot of synthetic audio companies out there, and I think that the question that that we're not necessarily answering ourselves, because we're developing the software, and if you like, you can put synthetic content, synthetic audio into our system. But I think the question will be how, if you do use synthetic, how are the people who created the data sets that were used to create that synthetic voice, how are they being compensated? Did they give consent for that use? I know that in various different territories around the world right now, there is quite specific law starting to come into effect that says that you can't just do a blanket recording of somebody without them knowing the specifics of what it was being used for. So I suspect that those kind of laws will start to leach in as well, where you can't just say or do one performance, or even going back into library and taking people's historical performances and using those to generate now performance in perpetuity without giving the right credit and also the right remuneration for the people who created those performances.
And did you have something to add?
Yeah, do you mind if I add to that? I think sort of when we're looking about sort of what the future might look like, then actually legislation that works around informed consent is actually particularly important. Because I think that there are companies that set up that do take people's voices taken from historical data and will use those data sets to be able to drive future performances from current voice actors and all the rest of it through AI. So actually that argument about should informed consent be built into any digital likeness, I think needs to be clarified, and I think needs to be legislated for, because I don't think it's right that anybody's voice, any one of us, could take a phone call and we don't know who that phone call, who's on the other end of that, and we say hello and we try and work out who it is, but actually they're scraping our data off that telephone, and then they're sending it to a third party, and there's no chain through that. But actually the act of scraping somebody's vocal likeness at the moment isn't legislated for. So actually, when we, there's obviously lots of talk about, will David Attenborough, have his voice on natural history programs forever? Virtually Parkinson, Michael Parkinson, did we steal his voice? No, we didn't. We licensed it, for clarity. But the point is the fact that I've licensed it because I'm an ethical producer. That's not to say at the moment there is any reason why anybody else should do it the same way as I did it. You would like to think that we all do things responsibly, but of course actually there's nothing to say that we have to do it that way. In the States, you have the publicity laws, or the publicity likeness laws, whatever they're called, and that works quite well. if it weren't quite so disparate. So, for instance, I could actually do a digital likeness at the moment of John Lennon because he died in 1982 in New York, and the digital likeness laws last 40 years posthumously in New York. However, in California, which is where Marilyn Monroe died, they last 80 years. So I can't do a digital likeness of Marilyn Monroe. In the UK, you can do anything, and that doesn't necessarily feel right. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Martin was going to come in.
Yeah, thank you. So, and we've just talked about audio there. I just want to obviously emphasize as well that we can do this with face and likeness as well. And on some level, that's what we do. We allow a 60-something-year-old Tom Hanks to be aged down to a 19-year-old man, and then aged up to an 85-year-old man throughout the course of a film. In the case of here, what the trend is obviously here is less and less data is required to be able to control and manipulate that sort of very important visual data. And obviously our likeness is inherently important and sort of sacred towards us. What that provides in the long term, which is very, very exciting, is innovation opportunities. I could be a huge fan of Star Trek. You can scan my data off of just what is publicly available of me online, and then I can be an extra in a film about Star Trek, and I'm very, very excited. Wow, amazing. But the question of who owns that data is also, what we've really established in talking this morning is data is what powers the creative opportunities and the innovation and the opportunities here. And so who owns that data all the way down to an individual level is an important question, one that's not been, I don't think, very clearly resolved. I'm sure the social media companies will want to claim that they inherently own it because maybe that you're pulling data off of usage of their platforms to create those sort of creative opportunities and immersive opportunities. I think that's an area that is related to film and high-end television, or certainly will be, and that we should be looking to sort of take a leading position on and regulate, with some aggression.
And I mean, on the foreign language point, there was always dubbing. There were actually actors that always did Sylvester Stallone's voice or whatever. Do you think, first of all, that sort of, but at the same time, when you go to the cinema in France, you can see VF or version originale or whatever. What extent do you think that this really immersive way you're talking about that captures emotion and the whole lot could be threatening the English language as the lingua franca, as a big global export, if it's so easy to switch on a thing? And
yeah, I mean, I've had the privilege of working all over the world, and I know a lot of people that said that they learned English as a result of watching English language movies with subtitles. I don't think is going to be a huge impact on that side. I think that the reality, I think there's going to be a huge positive impact, because if you imagine that until now, in many countries, dubbing and subtitling has been a barrier for people enjoying stories from all over the world. And I think that we've got the opportunity here to be able to, story is a very human thing, but language is a regional thing. But I think that, if we can have ways that we can now consume other people's stories from all around the world, we get to educate ourselves on other people's cultures. Well, the proxy is we're watching interesting and exciting stories, but ultimately we're being educated on other cultures. At the moment, we're mostly watching only things from our own culture, only stories from our own cultures. So, I think that there's an opportunity in reality is we're going to be exposed to a lot more exciting stories from all around the world, and I think probably better for it.
Yeah, Benjamin.
So some real world examples for you there is that, so we've been having conversations recently about, what technology could do in order to create regional languages, if you like, of pre-existing content. And actually the tests that have been done actually are an uplift to the economy, to businesses in the UK, and they are not a downturn. So we've been able to sort of identify that actually that is an increase of an opportunity for the UK economy, not something that could be seen as a bad thing.
I think, Rupert, I'm going to have to move on to the next question. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Martin, Ben and Nick. I want to talk to you about skills, specifically, Benjamin, I'll come to you. How easy or hard is it to recruit people into the industry with regards to sort of AI tools in your films?
I think that this is an area that is just waking up, if you like. So I mean, the National Film and TV School have been in touch with us in order to set up a new course that will give training and opportunities to the next generation of filmmakers. So you can see that this is quite early doors on all of this. But actually, we've actually hired 2 individuals to aid our creative output, whose sole purpose is to understand software, AI and Python. So they're actually building tech that allows us to produce new programs that we couldn't have done 12 months ago or even 6 months ago. So there is this sort of blend now of actually the merging of the IT sector and the media sector in a way that is sort of advancing more than it had done perhaps in the last 5 to 10 years. And what will happen, I suspect, over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years is going to be that the next generation of filmmakers are going to grow up with the knowledge of how to, at the very base level, how to use the AI tools, which will aid in the production process. But they will also have specialist skills within prompting per piece of software. So prompting being that idea of being able to write a text piece that says, can you make this scene brighter and look like it was lit from behind rather than the front? Because each of these tools, they kind of use their own language in order to get the best out of them. So in the same way as that at the moment you have editors who, broadly, editors all understand how to construct a story, whether that's in unscripted or scripted, but they have a set of tools that they prefer to use whether that's, Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, whether it's, what have you, Avid, the list goes on. But everybody has something that they work with better. And you'll end up with almost a division of prompt engineers who you can bring in order to escalate. But we're not quite there yet, but we can certainly see that is a trend that is beginning to come in, and that will become an addition to the sector.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly quote someone here. Neil Hatton, the UK Screen Alliance CEO, he said, the education system was not teaching the right blend of skills that we needed in not just visual effects, but games, animation, and the whole 3D visualization sector. Those skills were maths, physics, art, and coding. It is a very strange mix, but it's the right mix for us. Is that your opinion? Do you concur? Do you disagree?
I'm going to be annoying and ask you to read the quote again. I'm also
yeah, of course.
When was that said?
This was, I don't have a date, I'm afraid, but I'll repeat it.
Are we talking about something quite recent, rather than something that was said 10 years ago?
That's quite recent, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So the education system was not teaching the right blend of skills that we needed in not just visual effects, but games, animation, and the whole 3D visualization sector. Those skills were maths, physics, art, and coding. It is a very strange mix, but it is the right mix for us.
There's a lot of there's a lot of logic to that, because I mean, it seems as if he's talking specifically about 3D animation and CGI techniques and post-production. So I do understand where he's coming from, and I think that with every iteration of technology, you need to update the education program that goes around that. So I can see where he's coming from, but I suspect that is sort of isolated in his experience, not necessarily captures the broader appeal of everything.
Nick,
I think Martin wants to come in on this.
Okay, Martin.
Yeah, I'll just go quickly. We have about 150 people all spread across the world who are definitely reflect that quote in terms of being a deliberate, intentional cross-section of people from, actors, artists, creatives, storytellers, but also machine learning engineers, AI algorithm builders, et cetera, et cetera. Our chief innovation officer is a Belgian national, but came to Bournemouth University and studied at their Centre for Computer Animation. So we're in a decent place in terms of being able to have some of the skills that are necessary to thrive in this new economy. And I think Britain has traditionally had might not have the political might, might not have the economic might, but it has had the cultural might. It has had a good brand as a place that if you want to come and combine technology and kind of traditional culture, you can come and do that. But what's absolutely the elephant in the room here is that the salaries and the general kind of packages that are being offered to bright people like that by your OpenAIs, by your Google Geminis, etc., are ludicrous. They're very, very, very hard to compete with. So UK-based businesses, I'm British, I've lived all around the world, I've studied all around the world. We chose to build Metaphysic in Britain for the reasons that I just mentioned. We do need help. We do need to be able to continue to point to that sort of cultural footprint that the UK has, and I welcome all of the tax breaks around independent films, around VFX, because they definitely help to continue that. But also we need to make it a very easy place for that talent to come and to work here and to live here. So visas need to be very, very easy, I would say, especially for those working in creative and ethical AI.
Nick, do you want to come in there quickly?
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a distinction just in this room between the people who are sort of building these tools and the resources that they need, and the human resources they need, and the people who are using those tools. But both of them represent like this sort of merging of technology / science and creativity, creative arts. From the product development side, like Martin's mentioned, at Flawless, we had to, it was like this crazy journey of sort of merging different cultures and different skill sets. So we had like AI scientists, ML engineers, and just pure researchers, mixing those kind of cultures and that knowledge with engineering and product development, and then having filmmakers in the mix and like quite different kind of groups and putting those people together. But it's like you say, it's extremely difficult to find particularly on the AI side, the science side, and for it's from people all over the world. We've got offices in the US, we've got offices in the UK, and in the science side, it's very difficult. On the engineering side, I think the UK is in an exceptional position. But and on the filmmaking side, I think in an exceptional position. So I think we've got a real opportunity there. But I think it's one thing for sure is that things that you mentioned maths and physics, and that's basically like AI. But those scientists have had to learn a lot about how the creative world works to be able to make these products. And it's on the production side, people who are using these tools, it's certain that the creators are having to become more technical. It's been discussed that mixing the traditional filmmaking processes with the sort of AI and synthetic filmmaking processes, which is emerging, that's happening. But like one thing I think we've got to be careful of is thinking that there's going to be this new community of filmmakers that are going to emerge, that are going to be able to make a film using Gen AI in a way that like traditional filmmaking industry and those incredible artists who have honed those skills over decades and decades, they're just, I can say with absolute certainty that there is that new community is not going to, it has to be the existing people from the existing industry with all those amazing skill sets using tools, and we believe in just putting powerful tools in the hands of those same creators and letting them augment themselves. It has to come from an existing industry augmenting itself and moving forward.
Need to speed up a little bit.
Yeah. My next question is for Nick and Martin. This is more around sort of regional disparities and recruitment as well. Do you sense that it's harder to recruit from certain regions over and above others? And I'll add another element to that question, which is around sort of career choice and career pathways, and to try and sort of bring people into the industry and keep them and show them a pathway through. Do you feel you can predict and promote a long-term career path within the industry?
Reality is that in our case, developing these products is so complicated that we need people in the same place a lot, and so London is our UK base, so we're really only recruiting from around London because people can't commute. And it's like, I know there's a lot of fully remote work, but in what we do, we can't do fully remote. The frame of reference that I've got is that in the UK, we have been able to recruit really well around the product and engineering side, and we have hired some scientists, but we've also got office in LA. And the truth of the matter is that the same conversation we've been having about these brilliant people from all over the world, they generally navigate towards California. And so we've been very successful in recruiting top AI scientists and people in that sort of scientific side of things in California, but less so in the UK.
Martin, was there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, actually, to distinguish, we are remote. We are remote first, and it means we hire essentially for talent rather than any sort of like proximity to a location. That has allowed us to compete with the OpenAIs and the Googles because people can come from a lower cost of living area. There's less friction for them to get into work, etc. So we have not found a problem hiring from diverse areas, and we kind of actively encourage that, or etc. And on the question about dedicated career path, I do think that is a challenge. I do think that the speed at which things are moving and the cross-sectionality and the cross-discipline nature that we talked about of kind of film and AI combining does mean that it's hard for someone to tread a linear career path. I think that is a reality that is going to change the way that from school up to university and beyond. I think that is a reality that we have to embrace, and it's more like a scatter graph of roughly relevant experience that you have, and then you draw a line of best fit throughout it rather than something that you can chart proactively. Generally, if you're an individual, if you're a young student, but also if you're a filmmaker, if you're an actor, these are exponential technologies, and we don't try and win the future by accurately predicting it now. We just kind of pick a direction. We pick a belief that AI is going to be part of creativity, and we generally try and get experience across across the field given that.
Thanks so much. I'm going to move on to the next one. Can I do want to try and bring this session to a conclusion shortly after 11, so if I can ask you all to be as concise with your answers as possible. And on that note, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk a little bit about the ethical use of AI, and we've all touched on it obviously in different ways. And Ben, I just want to say Virtue Parkinson is uncanny. I mean, it's extraordinary, anyone who listens to it. And what's really interesting, as you said, is that you've got the license, you've got permission, there's full buy-in there from what is effectively a national treasure and the use of that voice. So what I wanted to say is, or ask you about was, given that we're talking about how we can best help British high-end film and TV, you've all touched on the fact that the legislation isn't exactly in the right place, if at all, at the moment, but also whether or not there are any voluntary or industry standards within Britain at all. So, and there's that balance. I mean, I think you said, Ben, good ethics is good business, and I think it was Martin who said that we need to legislate with some aggression. Can I ask each of you in turn, what is your view of what we need to do, both in terms of industry standards that are global standards and in terms of British legislation? So first to you, Ben.
So, I mean, I think sort of the industry standards are being laid out. There are central pillars that Pact and Equity and Writers Guild of Great Britain and others are bringing forward and publishing, and those sort of sit around the central pillars of respecting human creativity in all its forms, be that future, present or past. So that covers copyright, it covers informed consent, and those sit sort of very, very strongly. And then we look at we're looking at bias and making sure that producers feel that there is a responsibility to not just use tools. And I think we are looking sort of predominantly within this area at sort of generative AI, so generative images, generative video, generative voice. That we don't perpetuate inherent bias that's built up into systems, because obviously AI software is built on training data that is of course historic, and that therefore we know that bias is probably going to be inherent within those systems somewhere, and that there is personal responsibility within that. And so currently what I'm engaged with is I'm having very early discussions with the heads of BAFTA in order to generate what we hope to be a certification scheme similar to the Albert calculator, that looks at a very defined way of saying, right, okay, there is no legislation. However, we can, that becomes a broader issue because that encapsulates social media use and all the rest of it. But within the broad, commercial broadcast sector, we're saying, right, our guidelines or our certification scheme means that if you want a programme to land on one of our UK channels, it cannot use X, Y, and Z, or it must have informed consent, or it must, and those are things the industry are doing. Now, with the Albert calculator, we know that took a little while to get off the ground. We're talking, I think there were 2 or 3 years where it was voluntary. And then it became compulsory for BBC and others to, that if you want your programme on there, that's what you must have at the end of it. Now, the worry with AI is the fact that the amount of damage that could be done by setting a precedent within that, if we roll it out in the same scale, means that actually we need to legislate fast. And we need those, the media sector or the broadcast sector has clearly agreed within itself what those guidelines need to be, and I'm very, very happy to share those with you at another time, separately. But really, that then needs to be legislated for.
That's really helpful. Nick?
Yeah, I think the main sort of topics are around copyright, consent, and compensation, right? I think that, distributors are currently, to some degree, regulating the industry through their fear of not understanding exactly where copyright law is going to land. So things are being throttled in the appropriate way, which is the same kind of objective you'd probably be looking for with legislation. I think that the guilds and the unions in creative industries are appropriately powerful, and I think they're also basically in some way like they are governing, how people are operating. I think at the moment, I just think we need to be careful about sort of jumping in too quickly. Bearing in mind this is coming from the people who proactively wanted to define in ethics and the correct protections for artistic rights. I'm not trying to push back. I'm just saying there's a danger if we jump in too quickly with something that's moving so fast at the moment that we don't do it in the appropriate way. And I think at the moment, at least from what I'm seeing, is that the industry is being well protected from the mechanics that I've just described. And I think that sort of going through it gradually and I don't think we should be doing it aggressively. I don't think we should be rushing to it, but I do think we should be having a regular dialogue that basically gets the both sides of these tables to be really understanding the situation. And then if we can do that, I think that when timing will just deliver its own sort of timing will become clear of when we need to do something.
Just Ben briefly.
Sorry, I have a natural response to that, which is that the industry bodies that have been engaged in this conversation have not been doing this as a knee-jerk reaction. This has taken 18 months to 2 years to get to this point where we all agree what the central pillars are. So to suggest that this is an aggressive knee-jerk is not accurate. So therefore, at the point that we're looking for legislation to back up what the sector's saying, then that is a natural progression of things. It's not a knee-jerk.
We'll let you take that.
Yeah. I thought that was important.
Just for clarity, I didn't say a knee-jerk. I said that I don't think we need to move too quickly on it.
I get that. Martin?
Yeah, thank you. So it was me who talked about aggression, stirred the pot there. I think the aggression really comes when it comes to the obvious things that we know we should legislate and that maybe people have not got their eyes on, which is the individual data for people like you and I, not just necessarily the big Hollywood or British film stars, but the individuals whose data could be used to power up in the way that those film stars currently are. That's where we should have aggression. The areas where we should have specificity are the broader areas that we're talking about here around sort of, film and high-end television. I think the EU approach is very driven by abstract concepts of AI and harms. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the US approach that we're likely to see with the incoming administration is the opposite, which is a total hands-off kind of ostrich head in the sand. I think what the UK has as an opportunity is what we've talked about today, actually has the filmmakers, actually has the creatives who are using and building on a day-by-day basis this technology. And so I think we have an opportunity to be very specific in how we legislate. I think some basic principles, my background is actually as an intellectual property and data privacy lawyer. My co-founder at Metaphysic, I met at Harvard Law School, both lawyers. We started with some very clear guide rails, which were no politics, and always using informed consent. I think those are some pretty fundamental, non-controversial pillars that we could go with. I think economics right-wise, if we're dealing with an actor whose face has been scanned or an actor whose voice has been scanned, and we're now going to use that in a production context, I think what SAG-AFTRA established was pretty decent and pretty reasonable, which was that we would pay them for a reshoot, for example, on the basis of them having been there. So that this is not a technology that is all about driving the economics of performance down. It's about overcoming the very real challenges of logistics and scheduling and getting people on shoot. So it allows things rather than sort of just automating and driving the price down. I think that is a key principle that we should be looking at also.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I've finished, Chair.
Very much. On to Tom.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to ask a little bit about audiences and should just disclose an interest early on that I'm a former official for Prospect and Bet2 trade unions which represent workers in the creative arts. If you could be brief with your answers if possible. Do you think audiences have a problem with the use of generative AI in programme making, and should there be a legal requirement of disclosure for any of you?
I don't know if I think that if audiences don't, in our case, have issue from what we can see, because they're in for localization, they're enjoying content. There's no one really likes dubbing and subtitling, or at least it's not the ideal form of localization. And I think people are quite pleased to be able to consume things in a different way. I think that the reason I'm pausing on the whether it should be that there should be a need to disclose is, so I'm lean generally towards yes. I think it should be disclosed, but I generally also think that the industry will kind of work that out for itself. And one of the things that I think that is going to end up starting to happen is that I think that people who are doing things ethically, I think those brands will start to represent trust marks, and I think people will want to disclose it. And I think that it's just, again, it's back to this. And again, I'm genuinely not implying that there is knee-jerk reaction or we're jumping into things. But if we have a situation where the SAG-AFTRA agreement that was made at the end of last year, which we sort of had some conversations about behind the scenes, is that I want to understand the difference between legislation and these very powerful guilds and unions who are saying this is the way that we want everyone to operate. So we've got to work within those guidelines anyway. And we don't need to rush into things. I would say that there probably is some benefit in being disclosed, but I believe the industry will work that out for itself.
My gut instinct is very, very similar. I mean, you could look at the initial reaction to Jerry Anderson, A Life Uncharted, which used deepfake, and when that was announced, the reaction to that was pretty horrific, and I was called every name under the sun. Digital meat. I was engaging in digital meat puppetry, which I thought was a wonderful phrase, and I wanted on a T-shirt. I didn't get one. But what I thought was particularly useful was that actually when it came out, the audience who actually saw it went, oh God, you've announced that it was AI, and actually we see the purpose of it, and we accept it. But then conversely, you look at the Coca-Cola advert, which used AI, and actually the audience didn't really care. The industry kind of went, oh my God, you've all used AI, but the audience didn't care. So I think it's sort of, there are levels of nuance to that, and I think that is something the industry ought to work out, and I don't think it's something that ought to be legislated for.
Martin, do you have a view? And perhaps also you talked about having a no politics rule. Do you think there are certain types of content, such as current affairs or political broadcasts, that would benefit?
Sorry, just to clarify the question, would benefit in which way?
From having disclosure. Or can you talk a little about your no politics rule as well as your view on the former question, if that's all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So I think that there are examples, the Anthony Bourdain kind of documentary about his life where they used AI, there was no disclosure. They had him essentially saying things that maybe he didn't say or were vague. And I think in those instances, those are short-term wins for the filmmaker. They get their film out there, they maybe even get a press cycle, but they very much undermine the sustainability of what we're talking about here, about the contribution of AI in filmmaking. And so I think generally I would agree with the other panelists. I welcome any sort of watermarking or any sort of disclosure standard. I think obviously when it comes to film, there is a transaction here where someone is paying money or giving their attention to be in a state of disbelief and to kind of lose themselves in the story. And so it's certainly more difficult for some art forms and entertainment forms than it is others. But when it comes to anywhere where we are essentially, and this bridges to your second question, anywhere where we are essentially trying to represent the current state of a situation, and that's through documentary or through coverage of politics or a panorama show, whatever it might be. I think in all of those instances, frankly, we should have pre, during, and post disclosure. That is what gives audiences the sort of trust and transparency that means AI can be used for the right things, and we don't get whipped up and talking about it for misleading people.
Thank you.
I'll just make a very quick point that AI has been used in many creative industries for decades, and I think that we just need to sort of acknowledge the understanding that there's been huge breakthroughs in AI, and that's obviously like reason for this panel. But the reality is that in some form or another, like AI has been used for a very long time already. So I think that just understanding that this isn't entirely new, and making sure that I think watermarking is really interesting because you can watermark in an indelible way that's not visible, so that's perfectly possible to do that. And I think that Adobe is making real grounds on that C2PA policy, of being able to do those sort of indelible watermarking. So I think it's all sort of starting to happen, but it's being provided by sort of all the different technology companies, and everyone seems to be wanting to endorse that as well. So the people at least who are doing it legitimately.
Just a really quick point of reference for you on that. Yeah, really quick. Actually, if you look at Crime Watch as a perfect example, we've been through this issue before with dramatic reconstruction, where initially during Crime Watch episodes you would always see dramatic reconstruction emblazoned on the screen at the time. However, in recent years that has been dropped on the basis that everybody now knows what dramatic reconstruction looks like, and that is an industry thing that's been accepted. It's not something that has come from the outside in.
You're allowed off. That was a good comment. Natasha, to bring us in, please.
So just very quickly, because we're running out of time. So it's really comforting, and just declaring just my husband's a voiceover artist. It's really comforting to hear discussions around consent, and that the industry is talking about that, and that's front and centre. But are some of the solutions to how we ensure consent is enforced in technology itself, and can that the technology itself provide that comfort in terms of monitoring?
Yeah, I think so. What are the coincidences of having two people on the panel who have got people who are working in voiceover? But I'm very glad we made some decisions a few years ago around ethical use of data. We literally have built consent flows into our technology. So in the example where a new line of dialogue has been provided, it will get put through our system. That will then get sent out through an app, and the talent on the other side will be able to check and have a look at how it looks. They can press a button that says, I consent to this. If they want to, they can record a new line of dialogue, send it back. That's just one example of how I think there's going to be a myriad of different consent flows to be able to, this is back to this parallelization of production and post-production, because what you're doing there is you're back on the set, aren't you? But you're doing it through technology. And I think that's there's going to be, we at least, and hopefully other people as well, are going to be building all sorts of versions like that to enable, the continued use of these technologies.
And just a quick follow-up question. So it's interesting, so the TV and film industry is trying to find solutions around this, but it's sort of mentioned earlier about social media. So are you going to, once you're setting these standards and you're kind of working in an ethical way, is then the challenge going to be how to ensure that other providers in media space do the same thing? Because otherwise you'll be sort of producing content that's really ethically made on one hand, but on the other hand it's not, and then you're sort of...
I mean, I think that's kind of why I welcome this conversation so much is because we as filmmakers and industry professionals, there is only so much we can influence. So we can only really influence our own sector. The social media sphere is obviously completely different. Now, any programs that are made commercially and then find their way online, well, then that is if they are commercial first, as in somebody has paid for them, and then they are distributed online. Well, they need to be held to the at the point they go online, they're made with the standards that you would make commercial television for. There is then there's then a discrepancy between if somebody makes a program in using all of the AI tools at their disposal that they can use at their own computer. Well, will they follow the same guidelines? And the answer to that is no, absolutely they won't. The internet has always been there for people to break the mold, and a lot of innovation has come out of that. But that's why the standards that we as an industry uphold, we are here saying, look, actually, there are wider implications to this, and not least of all, because the TV sector is in crisis. And so, we're now at this position where there's sort of a perfect storm where we're saying, right, okay, this whole expression of digital first has come in, which means that we're all exploring how to monetize social media content. So actually, we're sliding into this place where actually our programs are going to go on socials first. So who's going to uphold the standards that we've set to ourselves, because Ofcom isn't in a position to look after social media at the moment, despite the fact that it is now under its remit, but it's not in a position to do it. So we need to look at, well, how do we then influence and how can we stop these things from sliding? And the answer is sat with you guys here asking the questions you're asking.
I think Martin wants to come on.
Yeah, I think, thank you. It's I do think there's a piece here around sort of regulation and trying to have common industry standards, but I also think that we are seeing the start of a maturing sort of product space where people, we've said that if you want to put Tom Hanks in a shoot and he can't be there, then we know that needs to use his data. And so there's an emerging product space, and Metaphysic is in this space with our Pro product, where you can actually have anyone scan, manage, and then provide very specific instances in which a production company or a studio can use that data to power him up into a shoot or to manipulate his appearance. And so that can be used to sort of police non-permissioned uses and non-permissioned deepfakes, but it also enables, so it's not simply about regulation, but also having that space for the product and the data protection. Excuse me.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we were a bit pushed for time. We're sort of staring down the barrel of Prime Minister's questions. So, but if there was anything we didn't get to, any further evidence you want to share with us, would you please pass it over, because we want to make sure we've kind of captured all your thoughts in our report. So thank you very much to Ben, to Nick and to Martin for joining us today. Can I now invite our next panel to join us? While they do, Ed, can I just ask you just to say a few words just to check your audio? Thank you.
There we go. It was being automatically muted, but you've got me again. Thank you.
Okay, you may have to speak up a little bit, Ed, if you can, because we're sort of struggling with that external noise.
Yeah, is this, if I speak this loudly, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you. That's brilliant.
Cheers.
Excellent. Thank you to our second panel for joining us. Many are concerned about the impact of irresponsible AI development on copyright and creators' livelihoods. Our second panel is going to talk about how the government can protect the rights of our creators and copyright holders. And we're delighted to hear from Dr. Mathilde Pavis, who is legal consultant, Liam Budd, the industrial officer for recorded media at Equity, and joining us remotely we have Ed Newton-Rex, the CEO of Fairly Trained. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We have a hard stop of 11:50 in time for Prime Minister's questions, so if I could encourage you all to be pithy and entertaining in your answers, and I'm going to go first to Paul for the questions.
Hi, thanks very much for coming. Ed, first to you. You released a statement on AI training data in October. That was supported by many leading figures in the creative industry, from Bjorn from ABBA to Tom York and many others. Why did you feel that statement was needed, and has it achieved what you hoped it would?
Yeah, I mean, I think generative AI can be a powerful tool for creativity, but sadly, right now, as is commonly known, the majority of Gen AI companies are unfairly exploiting the life's work of the world's creators. They're using that to train models that compete with those creators. Now, this is clearly illegal in the UK. We can talk about that, and I think will probably be judged to be illegal in the US as well. But AI companies tell us regularly that what they're doing, this scraping, is good for creators. And what this statement was hoping to show was that actually creators don't think this is good for them. And so it has more than 36,000 signatures at this stage. It's a simple statement rejecting unlicensed training as a major unjust threat. We've actually got a bunch of new signatories just in the last week or so: Stephen Fry, Hugh Bonneville, Miriam Margolyes, and other actors. And I hope it shows the government that changing the law to allow training on copyrighted work without a license, which the FT has reported insiders as saying is the government's preferred outcome. I don't know whether it is. But I think that change to the law would, I think, be totally unacceptable to Britain's incredibly important and rightly respected creators.
And can I ask you, what would the legislative routes be, in your opinion, that would be better than that?
Well, the alternative to scraping training data is licensing training data, and licensing is absolutely the right approach. It's already being done by many companies, but lots of AI companies are also scraping training data. As I say, in the UK, this is currently the law that you have to license training data for generative AI. There is, some in government, I think probably unintentionally, but have recently been saying that copyright law there is some uncertainty around copyright law. This, I don't think, is the case, though. We can maybe talk about this further, but there is currently no uncertainty around copyright law in the UK. It is clear that there is no text data mining exception for commercial generative AI training. Lawyers don't think there is. Even AI companies don't think there is. Google recently made a statement saying that the UK should enable TDM for both commercial and research purposes, which is obviously a tacit admission that that is not currently the case. So I don't know where the idea of uncertainty in UK current copyright law is coming from.
Thanks, Paul. Let's move on to Tom.
Thank you. Perhaps to Mathilde and Liam, how are the signatories' concerns about the impact of generative AI on their livelihoods playing out of practice, the signatories to the statement?
Hi, so we represent a broad range of members. They are actors, they are singers, dancers, supporting artists, variety performers. And many of our members have signed that statement. I think it's really important to distinguish between authors or copyright owners versus our members who will have performers' rights, and they'll also be rights holders as well. And typically they would assign or license their rights to the producer or the copyright owner. They have very shared interests. They have the same goal here in terms of protecting copyright, but I suppose the impact on our members is even greater. They are very vulnerable because what we're talking about is their image, their voice, or their likeness, and that makes them very vulnerable because this is a very sensitive type of data. They share their concerns. They're very aware that basically large-scale intellectual property theft has happened. Nobody in the creative industry is happy about this. And in terms of the impacts, there are sort of various things at play here. Firstly, just in terms of the displacement effects, members are very aware that this technology is replacing them, and effectively they are competing in a marketplace with generative AI systems that have been trained on their creative works without their consent. And some of our members are at the hard face of this, particularly like audio artists or supporting artists. And this also has a direct impact on their income. Their income is derived from licenses or assignments that they create on a project-by-project basis. And effectively, this is cutting off potential income streams for a workforce that is incredibly insecure and often relies on those secondary payments. And this also has sort of big moral and ethical issues here. Their privacy is essentially being hijacked. And there's a lot of moral issues at play there.
I mean, I would detail that. I think to go back to Ed's point earlier, UK law is pretty clear on mining. If it's done other than for non-commercial purposes, it's not allowed, you require consent. Where we do have less clarity, however, is at the later stage in the AI process when we have generation of performances or works that look like, sound like pre-existing protected work. What happens? Is that an infringement? Is it not? If it's as a result of the tool having been trained on what sometimes we call dirty data, unlicensed, unlawfully accessed data, then it's likely to have carried out that infringement through. For performers, the real vulnerability comes from the fact that we have no protection in the UK at the moment against unauthorized digital imitations of people, which is essentially what AI generates when it synthesizes a voice, a face, or a whole body, or all of it into integrated into an output. And the reason for that is because our intellectual property framework, which is not copyright but performers' rights for this particular point, didn't have that application in mind of the technology. Legislators did think about imitations in the past, but at the time those laws were introduced in the 60s and in the 80s internationally, 88 for the UK, we thought that the most a performer could face is a tribute act or sound alike or look alike. So not a big economic threat, not a big moral threat. If anything, maybe a compliment. But now the technology has changed that, because when you can be imitated on scale, then it's a different game. Those are different economic and moral threats. And what really we would expect is for the UK to have a system where your digital self and your physical self are equally protected, especially now that our digital lives are such a big part of our personal and professional work. And performers happen to be the canaries in a coal mine on that particular point.
Thank you. And Liam, how responsive are you finding employers are being to the film, within the film and TV industry, to your efforts to negotiate new AI protections into contracts?
Great. So we have collective agreements across film and TV with the major broadcasters, with PACT for film and TV, and also with the streaming platforms. So we are currently in negotiation to establish AI protections for film and TV contracts, which will set eventually the industry standard. And so we have been in rounds of negotiations for the last 6 months on this very issue. And I think from both sides there is an acceptance there that we all want to achieve sort of an ethical framework that is based on consent, that is based on compensation, but obviously we're not there yet, and we hope in the new year that we'll have a new set of frameworks that govern effectively how the industry operates.
Brilliant. And Mathilde, in cases where performers' contracts were signed before AI tools had been thought about, what can be done to prevent an earlier work from being used to train AI models that might put the performer out of future work?
That's a really good question, and really contracts are the vulnerability point or the most strategic area where you can intervene. Because if you think of rights as like a big door that can protect you if you close it, well, the contracts are the hinges that can swing it wide open if the person who has those rights doesn't enjoy the bargaining power to keep them. So the question is, it depends. Some contracts will have been written only to allow a right transfer from the performer, the author, the artist, the creator, to their producer, the distributor, for the purpose of the project. They're narrowed, they're sharp, they do that. So you transfer the rights for that purpose only. If you're in that situation and the contract is narrowly written and therefore interpreted, you're fairly well protected. It means that people you've collaborated with didn't acquire the rights to do more than that, and that seems sensible and reasonable. We all believe and want to work on that basis. This is what industrial agreements have in place. Now, the problem is those contracts have scope creep and language creep, meaning by that often the intention of the parties is, let's do a film, let's do a series, let's collaborate on this recording album if you're in the music industry. But the text reads something like you will have seen if you have a social media account. By virtue of this contract, you are transferring all rights in perpetuity for all applicable terms, technologies, and uses known today or coming in the future. And those broad buyout clauses, which is what we call them, are becoming standard, and they may have opened a backdoor to that statutory protection, which we want to see closed or we want to see unenforceable.
Really interesting. And perhaps to Ed and Liam, briefly, how far are creators likely to go to protect their rights? Will we see more strikes in the screen industries? Ed first, maybe.
I mean, I think that creators are organizing. There is a large and growing backlash to the wide-scale intellectual property theft that is happening in the generative AI industry. A large vocal group of creators honestly hate generative AI, and we know that a key reason for this is that they consider it to be stealing their work in order to compete with them. You know, we've seen the SAG-AFTRA strike in the US. We've seen British artists say that they would be willing to strike over this. We've seen online protests lead to AI film screenings being cancelled and experiments in generative AI from the BBC being walked back. So honestly, I think that if AI companies keep doing what they're doing, I expect this backlash to continue to grow.
Thank you. And Liam?
I think just to echo that, the vast majority of performers are very pessimistic about AI at the moment, given all of the intellectual property theft that is going on. And our negotiations couldn't be at a more important time, really. I think we're sort of building on what SAG-AFTRA achieved in the US. And when we've surveyed our members, AI comes as like the top priority for these negotiations, and there is a huge appetite for real change there to really modernise their contracts. We've also put together an AI toolkit with a suite of advice and guidance that our members can use, and they've actually been using that to assert their rights. So when it comes to GDPR or intellectual property, they've been using our advice to then stand up for themselves to make sure their rights are being protected. And yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much. Rupa?
Yeah, I had a similar vein, really, just with specific reference to voiceover people as last panel, and also image people. And I just wondered, Liam, equity, if this is such a precarious industry, we keep hearing, even with the Greg Wallace, that you've got your presenters at the top and your short-term contract people, how unionised is it? I mean, how easy is it to get members if it's such a short-term rather than a wage slave kind of industry? Even the existing voiceover, the dubbing actors and translators who are going to be put out of work by all this.
So we actually benefit from incredibly high density in equity, which means that we can be a very strong union to protect our members there. But I think particularly in areas outside of film and TV, for example, audio or video games, that is an even more precarious sector because we don't have collectively bargained agreements. And so that is where the even greater risk is, really. But yeah, I think we've been doing a lot of work to raise awareness around these issues. For example, we launched our campaign almost a year and a half or 2 years ago now on this very issue, because we know that audio artists have been incredibly engaged on this matter, and we've been campaigning for strengthened intellectual property rights for performers, which has gained a lot of traction with audio artists.
Mathilde, do you think the legal framework in the UK is sufficiently robust to protect?
For performers specifically and voiceovers, the answer would be no, primarily because it relies on a patchwork of different legislation. So for your intellectual property rights, you go to performers' rights, the Copyright Designs and Patent Act, the CDPA. For anything that you make to protect your voice or your face, you would have to default to the data protection regulation, the GDPR, which were not designed for that. And the two don't speak to each other very well. And your third option is a contract. A contract are largely unregulated, and this is where government can have real intervention, is by either, you have two options really, you go in like surgeons and you plug in the holes in those different areas of law, so you go in and update or introduce a new bill to amend the intellectual property framework, you make it speak to GDPR, and you look at contracts, making sure that there are terms in contracts that are unenforceable because unfair. We've done that for consumers, we've done that for employees, we've even done that for commercial contracts in B2B, business-to-business transactions. So it's possible. The next group that needs that are artists, creators, really, because of the situation we find ourselves in. The other option is to go for the wholesale, more comprehensive framework and introduce likeness rights. They exist in other countries. You can learn from lessons there. You have the US, you have European doctrines that you can learn from. But really importantly, whatever new rights you introduce, don't make them transferable. Keep them to the person who they're designed to protect. Otherwise, the distributor, the media companies, the platforms will acquire those rights, and they will be running the show, and they will not be protecting those people's dignity, privacy, and autonomy, which is what we're here for.
Just to echo that point, I think we do really need strong image rights here. The island of Guernsey has a really interesting framework where you can register your image, and I think it's something that we could look towards as inspiration, really.
Okay, so new laws, thank you. I think Bollywood will die if all this carries on to its logical conclusion. But anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Rupert. Natasha.
Hello. Thanks for coming in today. So just sort of following on from the previous panel, so it sounds as if there's at least some in the industry that are keen to go down, want consent, copyright, and make sure people are compensated for their skills. And the government is about to consult on the interaction between copyright and training data. So what kind of options do you think what kind of should that consultation look like, and what should be included within it?
Within the consultation framework. So I think inevitably there'll be a conversation around the opt-out, and we would say absolutely abandon that. That would be catastrophic for the industry and isn't feasible. We really learned that from the EU. But hopefully in that consultation we'll actually see specific questions around performers' rights. I think that often gets lost in the conversation. People are very focused on copyright owners, and there's been not a lot of focus really on performers' rights, which is a neighbouring right, and they are even more vulnerable, and that is where the legislation change is needed even greater. So I would hope that there'd be clear questions around the performer rights framework and how that can be strengthened to give our protections that they need.
Ed?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to echo that. I totally agree. And I wanted to maybe dive into the opt-out point a little more, because there are rumours that the government might consider an opt-out scheme along the EU style. Opt-out schemes for generative AI training quite literally do not work. There is no way of successfully opting your work out of training, given that there are legal copies of your work all over the internet, and you have no control over these legal copies. No opt-out scheme in existence can successfully opt out these downstream copies of your work. So opt-out in this sense is really an illusion for rights holders. It gives rights holders no real control. And this I think is probably the main reason AI companies currently favor opt-out as a solution, as evidenced by the fact that Tech UK recently came out in support of opt-out. There are many more reasons opt-out is unfair and unworkable, including the administrative burden, and including the fact that most people miss the chance to opt out. There's good data that shows most people miss the chance to opt out when you give it to them. So I thoroughly agree with Liam that I don't think opt out should be considered, and I think it will be seen as a mistake having put that into the EU AI Act.
If I may, a strong reason, in my opinion, to perhaps exclude even the EU opt-out regime from the consultation is that it's likely in breach of UK's international obligations for intellectual property treaties. So you have under several conventions, the Berne Convention, the TRIPS agreements, followed again by Rome Convention, Beijing Treaty, etc. There are trade agreements, they're part of the WTO package, that clearly outline that any exceptions or carve-out of creators' copyright, including performers' rights, cannot place an undue burden on the rights holder. It has to be limited in certain circumstances and cannot run into their commercial exploitation. That's called the three-step test. That opt-out regime, if introduced, is likely to be contrary to that. And those treaties are binding on the UK. So if there is one silver lining, and I'm surprised I'm going to say this, of Brexit, this might be it. The UK didn't have to introduce it and just missed it, and it's a blessing in disguise for the creative sector.
Just one follow-up question. It sounds like, and even from the previous panel, that everybody's very keen for legislation to be the thing that sorts this out. So can you outline sort of the downsides of what an industry-led, more informal approach versus legislation? Like what just that we understand that where our intervention is necessary, rather than just letting the industry kind of sort this out for itself.
I think for the film and TV industry in particular, we have a framework for collective bargaining, which means that the industry can sort it out itself between stakeholders, which is really great, but that isn't seen across the entertainment industry at all. So there are vast amounts of sectors where that isn't in place. Which means that there isn't sort of a framework for sort of industry collaboration, which means that then you often see much more exploitative practices. So I think what we also need is that sort of legislative framework to then govern how the industry can operate going forward. And I think what we need is the government to sort of incentivize sort of generative AI models that source ethically and legally compliant data. If you get that bit right, then we can crack on and get the industry running and get things operating in a smooth and effective way. But we need to ensure that the data that's being sourced is legally compliant and ethical, and that's where policymakers are vital there.
Ed wants to come in.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also wanted to mention that, I mean, there are other, when legislation isn't clear, and I think there's an interesting example in the US where legislation is pretty clear, but there is the there is the fair use legal defense to copying, and this leaves some room for debate in a given instance, perhaps. And when that's the case, what you tend to see is that actually AI companies are disincentivized from respecting copyright. They're disincentivized from going and licensing training data because they're actually being told by investors, by potential VCs in their companies, you can't waste time licensing. Like, the winners in this space are going to be the people who forget about the regulation and just go and train on whatever they can gather. So I think we really do. So legislation is really key here, because without legislation, I think AI companies are inevitably going to be disincentivized from licensing.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of explore a little bit around, excuse me, the sort of intellectual property around generative AI. So my question is to yourself, Mathilde.
That's
Mathilde. Right. What should the UK government learn from the legal models on policy alternatives being developed in other territories?
So there are sort of two types of models. You have the US, that there's a combination that has likeness rights combined with industrial representation that provides strong protection for actors, if we think about that, and also I would say copyright. Other countries like France have the same intellectual property framework that we do. The only difference for them is that they've done two things. They've introduced strong and broad moral rights, and they also have regulated their contracts. So in licenses, they have a list of terms and requirements for an intellectual property contract to be implemented and complying with in order for that contract to be enforceable. And that has injected best practice in areas, even where there is no union representation. So they've done that part quite well. And both those jurisdictions, although very different legal cultures, have also personality rights, image rights, etc. So they had that principle-based approach from the get-go, whilst the UK has a more pragmatic take and always has had that of intervening only when there's a problem. So we're at that crossroads. We have a problem. It's not a big one. It can be fixed pretty effectively, and then you can pass on the baton to industrial measures quite effectively.
Brilliant. Okay. And just following on, in terms of sort of like rights holders in the EU, I know we've touched on that. I just really wanted to make sure that I get that right. So how are sort of right holders in the EU responding to sort of the opt-out?
Very negatively. I mean, there are studies which perhaps we could share with the committee showing that the scraping online doesn't respect the communication of opt-out put in and communicated by rights holders or unions on behalf of rights holders. And we're starting to see that empirical evidence coming through. So what we know is that the sort of year and a bit that the regime's been enforced is already not working practically. And they also are raising the claim that I mentioned earlier, or raising the point that this regime, which was thought not in the context of AI, but only later was linked to AI, is now in breach of these international treaties because it basically drives a train through core fundamental rights of copyright performers' rights.
Thank you. Chair, last question to you.
Yeah, but I mean, just wanted to sort of... Sorry.
No, sorry. I don't know if Ed wants to come in.
I just wanted to
thank you. I was just going to totally concur with that and actually add that the statement on AI training, which is against unlicensed training, and what is being permitted in the EU AI Act is, essentially unlicensed training with an opt-out. And so our statement has been signed by the Federation of Screenwriters in Europe, the European Publishers Council, the European Writers Council, the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance, News Media Europe, as well as individual rights holder organizations from Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, Germany, the list goes on. So I think there are clearly a lot of rights holders who are not happy with the way that has landed.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Bio. Can I just conclude with you then, Ed? If the UK does want to be a global leader in AI without damaging our creative industries, is that possible? And what do we need to do?
It's absolutely possible. AI companies, I think, some of them, like to elide all of AI together and suggest that you need to deregulate all of it if you want any progress at all. But this simply is not true. The major economic opportunity from AI doesn't come from exploiting the life's work of the world's creators without permission. If you look at the AI work that Sir Demis Hassabis won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for, AlphaFold, wasn't trained on creative work. There has not been a single important scientific discovery that has come from AI trained on creative work. You train on creative work, you have a license if you want to replace the creative industries with AI without paying them, not if you want to go and cure cancer with AI, you know. So I think we should invest in data centers. We should provide AI companies with access to these. We should invest in AI education and training. We should give grants and tax breaks to AI companies. We should encourage the best researchers to come here through visa schemes. I think we can be world leaders in AI for healthcare, defense, logistics, science, and as regards AI in the creative industries. Finally, I think we can be the home of responsible AI development and responsible AI companies, and we can do all of that. We can be a global leader in all of that without destroying our creative industries by upending copyright law.
Fantastic, thank you. Do Liam or Mathilde have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think there are a few things we haven't touched upon today. Firstly, I think the government should fulfil its obligation to implement the Beijing Treaty, to extend moral rights to audiovisual performances, and to ensure that those moral rights are unwaivable so that they are not waived in contracts. I think that's a key thing, is to ensure that moral rights are extended but made unwaivable. I think we really need enforcement on GDPR laws. There is some really helpful legislation that we can utilise around GDPR and the use of our performers' personal data. And I think we need clear enforcement of those rules and a clear understanding of how they relate with intellectual property. And I think we just need legal certainty on the copyright framework, but also legal certainty on existing contracts, and effectively ensuring that people aren't using old contracts to get permission to then use data training or data scraping as well. So I think legal certainty and extension of rights.
You've got quite a Christmas list there, Lynn.
Yeah.
Mathilde, what's on yours?
I think on mine would be to also be mindful of the cross-sectoral impact of AI, because obviously we're here in film and TV. I think this industry is very cohesive. They have strong commercial relationships. They have mutual interests. So if you just focus on bringing that industry clean models, you're good. They will do the rest. They will use it responsibly. They will do what's good for the ecosystem. Other sectors are not in that position, video game, advertising. And there is a lot of independent filmmaking that is funded because people in this sector are taking jobs, paying jobs in commercials, in video games, and those jobs are likely to be impacted by AI potentially more severely because of the nature of the task and the absence of industry guidelines, and that may have a knock-on impact on the talent available in film and high-end TV unless you come up with a system to track funding and incentivize the right behaviour.
Liam, you wanted to add something?
Just a final point really, that I think a similar inquiry around the video games industry would be really welcome. I think the film and TV industry is something that we have a framework or we are looking to really improve upon, but there are other areas which I think could are in need of a deep dive, so video games inquiry would be particularly welcome.
Thank you. Ed, did you have anything final to add to the committee before we let you go?
I suppose the only thing I'd add is that, it's not just people like us who think about this. The general public, when you ask them these questions, agrees, at least on the training point that we've been talking about. There was a poll from the AI Policy Institute in April this year that asked people about the common policy among AI companies of training on what they call publicly available data, right? Which is, people's copyrighted life's work that they've been told to put online because it's good for exposure. And 60% of respondents said AI companies shouldn't be allowed to train on this, and only 19% said they should. And then when the same poll asked, should AI companies pay for their training data, 74% said yes, and only 9% of people said no. So, this is a commonly held view, and, I think it's important to remember that.
Very helpful. I thank you all for navigating us so deftly through this particularly tricky area, and I do hope that both the Department for Culture, Media and Sport and DCIT are going to reflect on the evidence of your panel, and in fact the one we had before as well, when they finished their consultation on the issue, because you've given us quite a nice roadmap to how we move forward on this. We're going to continue to monitor this situation very closely. We want to see how the government contends to support AI companies to grow, but also uphold creators' rights and ensure that they are fully rewarded. So we're really grateful for your contribution to our inquiry today. Order, order.